When we play piano music, we play with both our hands. We have a right hand and we have our left hand. But how do we tell which hand do we play, and how do we tell which notes to read for that right and the left hand? Well, we do that with clef sounds, and that's what we're going to discover today with this theory, putting the theory lessons into practice, is the two clef signs that we generally use for piano, and that's called the clef, and it's the treble clef and the bass clef. And it's the most important thing that we always have to look at first before we start reading any piece of music, is which register, which hands to use in order to play our piece of music. Now, it's very important to remember that we're not always going to play high-pitched notes or the treble clef notes with our right hand. No, sometimes we can play it with our left hand, and it's not always possible for the opposite as well. So it all depends on how the music is written and how we should be playing it. But the clef sounds is important because we also learn a little bit later in other lessons that the right hand or the treble clef notes are written differently or read differently than the bass clef notes. But let's start by looking at the stave and then seeing what these clefs look like and what they do. So usually in piano music we have two staves, and they are joined together, they are beamed together like so with a curly bracket, and we call this the grand stave. So the moment we do this, it becomes the grand stave. And what we do here is now we're going to draw our treble clef sign, and we're going to draw our bass clef sign, like so. And the treble clef is actually, as I say, not just for the right hand notes, but the treble clef is for notes above middle C, and it's for high pitches. It's for the high pitches, or the high pitch notes. And anything below middle C, on or below, is for the low pitches or low pitch notes, like so. And that's the most important thing to remember when we look at clef signs, is they're basically going to tell us in which registers on the keyboard we are going to play most of those notes. Now, notes can be written very high up with leisure lines for both the treble and bass, or very low as well. Again, it will depend on what type of music you are playing. But as I said earlier, it's not just for playing notes with the right hand and notes with the left hand. No, when we teach our young students how to play or identify these clefs, we always use I like to associate the treble clef with the right hand and the bass clef with the left hand. It just makes it easier for them to remember, and it's a good starting point as well when you start off with music. But in many cases we can get an instance where we have a piece of music, we have a few notes, and then all of a sudden we have a clef change, and then all of a sudden the notes are written for the bass clef. Oh dear, what do we do now? Especially if the bass clef notes for the stave below that on the grand stave is still for bass clef. No, we're not going to try and play it with both our hands. That would just be extremely difficult, especially if they're spaced widely apart. No, that just means actually that both our hands are going to move down into the low registers, or we are going to cross over. But for crossing over, it will depend on how busy our hands are, and also depend on what the intention was with that particular section in the music. So it's not just for the right and left hand, it is literally actually just for showing where high pitch or low pitch registers we are going to use. Now, apart from the treble and bass clefs, we get a lot of other different clef signs as well. That's a little bit for later when we are going to look at advanced clef notes or advanced clef signs and those are used for different instruments, wind instruments, string instruments, or even to just show different vocal registers as well. But they again changes the game a little bit when we have to read or identify these notes. As I say, the treble and bass clef has a different approach to reading notes. They're not the same. And that means that if we have middle C, for me, the most important notes on the piano and on the grand stave is that middle C. Everything starts there and moves down on the clef sign, up or down on the clef, moves up or down on the stave. If I write out a few notes here, let's do just C, D, and E, and I write the same ones down for the bass, I would see that one is ascending and one is descending, meaning that C, D, and E, but when I played with for the bass, C, B, and A. We're counting backwards in the alphabet. And we'll notice that even though C is the same, here we are actually going the opposite direction with our countings and our identifying of our notes. So it's very important to take note of that, because once we start learning about note names and identifying note pitches by their note name, we will have to be able to distinguish between these two. Otherwise, we're going to play the wrong notes and the notes are not going to make sense at all. So that's very, very important to remember as we progress throughout putting this music theory into practice. The treble clef and bass clef also has one different name. If I draw it out again, I'm going to have a very specific place where I'm going to start my drawing out, and that is on the line, on the second line. And this is the G line, where the G sits for all treble clef notes, or a particular G sits, and that's actually that G right there. And that's why we also call this the G clef. So we actually have the treble clef and we have the G clef. They're both the same thing. If I draw out my bass clef, I'll notice that I'm going to start on the second line from the top. And that second line is very important to start at, because this actually is the F line, or where all the F notes sit for the bass clef. And that's why this is also called the F clef. A very, very good starting point, especially if we want to read music. If we have a look at the clef sign and we see G clef, we know that this line here, I should immediately look at that like that and say that that line right there is the G line. And if I look and I see the bass clef, I would say that that line right there is where F sits, or the F line for all bass clef notes. So that actually quite help us as well to navigate around with the notes. How do we draw them out? Is it very important? Is it very important to draw out these signs correctly? Yes, it is. For me, when I draw it, I just draw it very, very quickly when I want to quickly transcribe or notate something down. But it's not correct. If we want to be accurate and we want to learn about the stave and the notes correctly, we're going to start there. We're going to twirl up, touch the third line, go down to the bottom line. We're going to twirl up, come straight down, and then we're going to make a little curl there, little umbrella handle. And starting there, we know that that is the G line. So if I do it one more time, I'm going to start there. I'm going to do it with a dotted line like so, going up, going down, all the way up, drawing half a heart or a shell. And then remembering those two dots, very important. Those two dots in between that F line. Look at that. Really accentuating that F line. And then we have the same if I draw with the dots. So it is important, yes, it's very, very important to draw it out correctly, to make sure that we draw accurately. Remember, the neater we draw music, the easier it is for us to read and play, or for others to read and play, especially if one wants to compose or write down a piece of music. It is very, very important to be able to distinguish the notes and distinguish what we need to play very, very clearly. So let's quickly recap then about the basic clef signs for pianists. We've got a treble clef, which plays actually the higher registers, or focuses on the higher registers, all the notes above middle C. And then we have the bass clef, which focuses on all the notes below middle C. And we're not always going to play it with the same hands, no, but generally it's for the right hand treble, and generally for the left hand it is the bass. It's very important to draw them out neatly. So when we draw them out, it must be neatly and accurately. And they also go by another name, the G clef for the treble, because it starts on the line where G sits for treble clef notes. And the bass clef starts on the line where F sits for bass clef notes. And we get a lot of different clef signs, but for piano, mostly we will be playing with the treble and bass. And that's it for this lesson on basic clef signs. If you, again, like this video, please like it and become a subscriber. Add that notification for new videos. That would be great, so that you don't miss out on anything for the future. And start a conversation in the comments below. I would like to know what you think. And as always, remember, you can use this to supplement your learning for any graded theory you're doing, like ABRSM, Rock Schools, or Trinity College. Thanks again for watching. See you again soon for our next lesson.